My name is Gary Kramer, and I'm the Executive Director of the State Historical Society of Missouri. On behalf of myself and my colleague, Kiana Irvin, Dr. Irvin is an Associate Professor of African American History here at MU. We want to welcome you to tonight's event, which is co-sponsored by the State Historical Society of Missouri and the University of Missouri's Office of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity. We're thrilled that you're here. This is a lecture series that began in 2016, soon after the concerned student protests in November of 2015. It is our effort to try to offer the public a new and better understanding of present-day Missouri by learning about the history of African Americans within the state and, frankly, the ugliness of racism that is part of our patrimony. Tonight, we are much closer to home in our talk. Those of us who have lived through the years of Jim Crow and have seen at least some of the changes wrought by the civil rights movement of the 1960s and 1970s will be inspired, I think, by tonight's guests. 97-year-old Sehon Williams. I walked up to Mr. Williams tonight and I said, "Mr. Williams, do you remember me?" And he said, "Yes, you interviewed me in my house 12 years ago." I couldn't remember when it was, but he did. 97-year-old Sehon Williams has had a front row seat to these events that have shaped the community of Columbia. Born and raised in this city, Mr. Williams served in Italy during World War II with the 92nd Infantry Division, also known as the Buffalo Soldiers. This was a segregated infantry division of the United States Army that served in both World War I and World War II. When Mr. Williams came home to a still segregated community after serving our country, he held jobs initially as a janitor and other work that would only be allowed to persons of his color. In 1955, Mr. Williams embarked on a career with the U.S. Postal Service. He worked there for 33 years in a management position, and all of this time he lived and worked in this community. And he has witnessed to the many changes that have taken place, in particular the rise and later demise of the Sharp End District that was home to Black-owned businesses in Columbia. With us this evening to begin our conversation is Columbia Civic Leader Bill Thompson. Bill came, no, come on. Bill Thompson came to Missouri from Fort Smith, Arkansas in 1976. He began working as a recreation specialist with the Columbia Parks and Recreation Department in 1981 and just retired a few years ago. Bill has a passion for local African American history and shares his knowledge with schools and community groups. He is one of the founding members of the J.W. Blind Boone Heritage Foundation and has served as a volunteer consultant with the Missouri Humanities Council, visiting historic organizations all over the state. So what's going to happen here is that for the next 45 minutes or so, Bill and Mr. Williams are going to talk, and I don't know where this conversation is going to go, but they're going to do what the spirits say do, and we're all going to enjoy it. And then at about 45 minutes, we're hoping that we're going to be able to stop them and invite you to ask questions of them. So you, as they're talking, if something occurs to you, hold your question. When it's time for you to ask your question, go to a microphone, if you would, please, because we're recording this, and your question won't be recorded unless you're speaking into a microphone. So we're going to have somebody, maybe me, walking around with a microphone. We'll have somebody to bring a microphone to you. So I don't want to cut into their time anymore. Please join me in welcoming Bill Thompson and Sehon Williams.
To get started, I think we will just do like we were doing around your house. Tell me the date you were born.
What?
When you were born, what date?
I was born in July 29, 1922,
1922.
3 West Line Street.
Okay. Were you born in a hospital?
No, born at home.
Why was that?
You couldn't go to the Boone County Hospital.
Okay. Okay.
In fact,
Go ahead.
even after I come out of the Army, 2 of my children were born at home because they couldn't go to the hospital.
I think that's a fact that a lot of people it escapes a lot of people that blacks were not allowed to use the local municipal facilities like the hospitals. Tell me a bit about your parents.
Well, my dad worked at Stephen College as a custodian and a chauffeur for 4 different presidents. He was there for 44 years. And my mother, she was a school teacher in Hillsdale before she married him. I had 3 brothers and 1 sister. 2 of the brothers died young, and my sister was an invalid. She lived to be 28 years old. So my mother took care of her.
Wow. So basically you lived at 3 West Lyons. That doesn't exist anymore. Think about that. West Lyons. Urban renewal kind of wiped out part of that area, right?
Urban renewal took care of that.
Took care of that. I've got a picture up on the wall here. Can you tell me about this house?
That's my mother's house. She bought that after I come out of the Army.
Well, tell me the story. You said that people were trying to buy the house from her, and you kind of stepped in.
Well, it's a long story. Lady wanted to buy my house, and housing authority called me and told me to meet her at Dave Bear's office. So we waited, and she finally showed up. And Dave said, "Are you by yourself?" She said, "Yeah." And he got on the phone, and I can't use the words he used. Anyway, he said, "Well, this lady can't buy the house anyway, because she was on Social Security, and they only gave her so much for hers." So then they sent my mother a letter. She had put on a new roof and a new bathroom. So I went down and I talked to him, and I think the fact that my name was associated with Dave Bears, they backed off just like that.
Well, that's basically, it wasn't so much that they knew you, but the people knew Dave Bear, who was an influential lawyer in the community, more or less. When you were a kid, let's kind of talk about some of the things you did. What type of things did you do when you were living in the neighborhood?
Well, when we were kids, we were poor. We made our own skate scooters. And when it was dry weather, we'd go down and walk through the tunnel and walk under the Dove schoolyard.
Right.
They'd have tramp socials, and you'd eat something at each house, about 7 different houses. You get to the last house and get your dessert.
So that was, well, think about it. That was the social activities that went on in the black community. The
Right.
tramp socials were a way that people could get around the community and feel safe, because everyone in the community took part in it. You were a lifelong member at St. Paul AME Church.
I was baptized when I was about 7 years old. Went to Sunday school, and then we would come home and change clothes and play a while, and then put your clothes back home and go to church with your mother.
Well,
And then when we got to be about 16 years old, they had what they called league.
right.
And we'd go to church, back to church at 6 o'clock in the evening to league service.
Okay, so that was for the teenagers.
Right.
Yeah. In other words, the church was an important part of the community as far as things to do.
Right. Well, all churches are really.
Exactly. Well, let's see. You said you were baptized. How were you baptized?
I wasn't baptized in the pool. I was dipped.
Now,
They don't even use it nowadays.
they sprinkle, man.
Yeah, they sprinkle everybody.
Okay, let's see here. Now let's go over here and tell us a little bit. You mentioned this ago. That's the branch off of 3rd.
It's what?
The branch? The tunnels? That,
Oh, yeah.
that top picture is basically where Blind Boom Center
Actually,
is
we
now.
used to, in wintertime, we used to skate in the branch over the rocks.
Well, I heard that there were a lot of people that had old fruit trees and all kinds of stuff in the neighborhood, and sometimes the kids would go down the tunnels, come up out of the tunnels, and then climb over the fence and snatch what they could, and then go back into the tunnels and eat the fruits and vegetables that they could get. Look at the other picture up there on the lower picture on there. Do you recognize that one? It's not a great picture, but
Blue and White Cafe.
that's the Blue and White Cafe in the 3rd
On the
Street
corner
Market.
was the Harvey House. There's a lot of teachers lived there at the time. Later on, well, a lot of people lived there, but then next door to the Harvey House was Blue and White.
Okay,
Then there was Jake's Market.
okay. Okay, that
Then
was,
you go on down a couple more blocks. There was Miss Jenny Taylor's, was right in front of the school.
right.
And then the next block was the shoe cobbler. Don't remember his name. And Tom McQuitty's barbershop on the corner.
See, I'm happy you're doing this because people need to understand that 3rd Street, Providence Road, was an important part of the community that people kind of overlook. They talk about Sharp End and the importance of the businesses there, but there was as many businesses in the community as there was in Sharp End. Let's see now. What about the Keep Cool?
Keep Cool, that was by Dick Tibbs' brother that was between Ash and Walnut Street. He had a platform in the backyard and a jukebox for the teenagers where they could dance.
Well, in other words, basically, the teenagers and kids stayed in their place and the adults went to their place, right?
Right.
There was no mixing of teenagers and adults. You talk about people going down on Sharp End. Over on Ash, there was a place called the Dewdrop Inn, right?
Right. That was just before, what is it, Beef?
Over next to Dalton Concrete or something like that, was it? Oh, no, Dalton
Right,
Coal.
just off the bridge there, off of Ash Street.
Yeah, right there, just off of 3rd and, well, off of Providence and Ash, about where the car rental place is. That's where it was at the time.
3rd Street, which is Providence Road now,
Right.
started at 40 Highway.
Okay.
Hickman was right on 40 Highway, which is a business loop now.
Right.
And then went from Business Loop down to Cherry Street, and there was a path going over into Stewart Road.
Okay. Okay.
On a two-lane road.
Okay, you're seeing the effects of urban renewal. In other words, Providence Road didn't exist. It was 3rd Street, and it ended until they made those changes when they resettled the people that were on Cemetery Hill and things like that. Urban renewal created the Stadium Road the road that goes all the way down to Stadium now. In other words, Stewart Road, there was a railroad bridge where the railroad went under it, right? At Stewart Road?
No, the railroad came up to Broadway there in front of Baptist Church,
Okay.
Katy Station.
80 Station, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Then there was a Wabash Station out east of Columbia.
Okay.
And you had people living out in that area. You also had families living out where Bob Gosh's place is.
Right.
And all these kids walked to school.
What he's saying is that there were distinct neighborhoods within the black community. You had the Cemetery Hill, you had the townies in the middle, you had the people who lived up by the Wabash, and then you had the people who are on the other side of Highway 40.
Right.
So there were differences in the different communities in the black community at the time. I heard that sometimes if you, like, you lived up on Cemetery Hill and you lived in town, you didn't get to walk over there, did you?
The Garth Avenue stopped just where 70 goes over Garth Avenue. Now, that was the end of Garth Avenue.
Okay. Oh, yeah. So basically, we've seen a lot of changes. When I was doing some research about Columbia after emancipation, many of the blacks moved into the northwest areas of Columbia. And if you look at this area up around where the Cancer Research Hospital, north of the highway, these were the areas where many blacks settled after emancipation. And they created their different communities. Let's see now. Go to the next one. Okay. Um, in 1928, you began your education at Douglas. Who was your first grade teacher?
My first grade teacher was Mrs. Bashirs.
Was she strict?
Yeah.
She said, yeah. Well, tell me a little bit more about going.
Douglas School was well thought of by everybody. Our teachers not only taught school, they taught Sunday school because they lived in the same area. It wasn't any so surprised to see your teacher sitting on the front porch talking to your parents. That's how close he was. And on Fridays, they'd have assembly, and all the kids would march in, and the teachers would stand at the door to monitor the activities. And over on the right side would be the band playing for them to march in with. And I played in that band for 4 years.
Well, see, he kept that a secret. I had to dig around and look at an article that Rudy Keller had done to find out that he played trumpet. There's another little building over here down below Douglas. What was that place called? Right there next to the car. The Cozy Shop?
Oh, Sharpie.
No, right across from Douglas School, where the kids would go and get their
That
pencil.
was Miss Jenny Taylor's across from Douglas School.
Okay. Was that the little shop right there?
And that little candy shop was on the corner
Okay.
next to Warren Warfield's place.
Okay. They called that they said that he sold pencils, cookies, and tablets and everything else. That was a place where a lot of kids would go. And I'll tell you what, tell me about playing sports at Douglas.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about playing sports at Douglas. You said you played
basketball
football.
for 4 years, but my football career was cut short.
What happened?
One day the coach was late coming up, and all the guys were throwing the ball around on the field, but I was laying over by the bleachers talking to the girls. He came over and kicked me under the bottom of the feet, said, "Go turn in your uniform."
That's a pretty good one, because, but what did he do?
We had the first new uniforms. Up until then, the only uniform we had was from Hickman High School and University, hand-me-downs.
Okay.
But that was in 1937. We had the first brand new uniform.
And you were the gentleman on the right-hand side in the picture over here on the far right?
On the right-hand side?
Down, that was you and your best friend, you said.
Where are you looking at?
Over there on that wall?
I'm number 2 in line, eventually.
Okay, well, you're on the left end, yeah. Okay,
Front.
okay. So, what other types of things did you do? Oh, I know. Tell me about John Redd.
John Roland Redd, he was a natural piano player. And every time we would go anywhere, if there was a piano there, you'd see him sitting at that piano playing it. And he graduated and went to California, and he was no longer John Redd. First, he was Juan Rolando at the filling station, at a radio station.
Okay.
And then he became Carl Pandit, and that's when he really branched out.
What we're saying is, instead of being an African American, he created a persona that he was Indian. He wore a turban and became the toast of California and was well known and very successful with. He would even have his family visit every once in a while, but basically it was one of those things. It was a time of separation. You could be anything but black and be successful, and that's what he did. I know. When did you graduate?
Graduated in 1940.
How many in your
12 girls and 12 boys.
12 girls, 12 boys? Okay. So how old were you when you got your first job?
I got my first job shining shoes at Davis Cleaners up on Broadway. And then my second job was taking tickets at Boone Theater.
Okay. And you did continue your education after high school, right?
Hmm?
You did continue your education after you got out of high school.
Yeah.
You went where?
Well, after the first summer, I went to Lincoln University.
Okay.
And after my second year in my first semester, I was drafted.
Mm.
So I came home and I drove a cab for Alvin Coleman for 2 months before I was called up for duty.
Okay.
I also got married during that time.
Yeah. So when you went into the military, did they have any testing or anything like that to decide what type of skills you were going to have? Or
That microphone is messing with you.
okay, I said when you went into the military, how did they decide what type of job you were going to have?
In the military,
Yeah.
I was pretty fortunate. We went into Camp Breckenridge, Kentucky. Well, first we went to St. Louis, Jefferson Barracks,
Okay.
and stayed overnight. The next morning, the sergeant got up on this makeshift stand with his foghorn. He said, anybody can play a horn, play an instrument, or type, step out. So I stepped out. I had going both ways because I had finished the typing course in school. So he said, anybody wants to be a clerk, step out. So I stepped out to be a clerk because I felt like being in the band was too much downtime and I didn't need that. So we left there and went to Camp Breckenridge, Kentucky. They separated, and one group went to Fort Robertson, Arkansas. Another group went to Fort McClellan, Alabama. Another one went to Camp Atterbury, Indiana. And we went to Camp Breckenridge, Kentucky. And there for 6 months. And all of them was transferred back to Fort Huachuca.
Wow.
And my outfit was the first one picked to go overseas duty. We left there and went to back in Virginia. And while we was there, now we couldn't go into PX, but they had German soldiers working as custodians. When they got off at 5 o'clock, they could go in and drink beer and talk to the soldiers. We were going to fight Germans and couldn't go in and talk to them.
I understand.
We put us on a ship at midnight, and then let us come up on the deck at 10 o'clock next morning, and all you could see was blue water and blue sky, like a blue bubble. You begin to wonder if you're ever going to get back home. And one of the guys said, well, we out here, we're sitting ducks. And a sailor happened to come by, and he said, no, you're not. He said, you protected under the water, and you protected on both sides and in the air. Well, at the time, we didn't know what he meant. But he meant sub was below you and battleship on each side.
So y'all were part of a convoy that was going to Italy?
Uh-huh.
Y'all were part of a convoy that was going to Italy?
In the convoy.
Yeah. Where did you wind up when you got off the ship?
When we got to Italy, we had to cross over abandoned ships. And those guys that had the rifles, I felt sorry for them because he was shaky. My weapon was a 45 because I was a fly sergeant. It took us to a bombed out crater. Next morning, the linemen went to the front and we set up headquarters. And while we were there, never did find out the significance of it, but every time the church bell rang, the bombs would come. It never failed. And we went from one part of Italy to the other end, Genoa, Italy. And when the war was over, you had so many points, you could come back home on a plane. I missed it by 1 point, and they wouldn't let me fly back. It'd take 14 days to come back.
Tell me about, I know you got married while you were, just after getting out of school, and then you basically went into the military. So you basically sent your money home to kind of take care of your family at home while you were in the military, right?
When I come home?
Well, you were sending your money home to your wife?
Well, when I come home, my wife had purchased a home, and she paid for it before I got out of service. I don't think any other soldier was welcome with that kind of a welcome, really.
Right.
But everything else was the same.
Yeah. Well, once you got home, what was that first job after you got back home?
My first job was at Barnes Clothing Company. And I had been there about a week. And I walked in and I spoke. He had two sons, Jimmy and Joe. They had long come from high school. So I spoke to them and we talked for a few minutes. I went on upstairs and he came up and he said, I need to talk to you. I said, why? He said, don't you think you ought to call Jimmy and Joe mister? I said, for what? Next morning I walked in and he handed me my check. He said, you won't work out. Yeah. Then I went to Darn Clothing and worked for 12 years as a spotter in a cleaning plant. And they had sent two guys to Silver Spring, Maryland to cleaning school. And I asked them if they would pay for me a correspondence course. But they came down with a contract, said, we'll give you 25 cents an hour raise, and you won't realize the raise until the course is paid for. I said, no, thank you. But it so happened the lady that was in charge, she was the best spotter in the state of Missouri, so I was told. She would teach me anything, but she wouldn't teach none of the rest of those guys. And she fell and broke her leg. And that morning when I come to work, both the brothers were standing there waiting for me. She said she didn't want nobody to do her job but you. So then they come down with a contract. Said, we'll give you 50 cents on our raise and there'll be no contract. I said, fine. And as it happened, I got my notice to come to the post office for interview the same day I got my diploma. And that ended my career at Darn Clothing.
So let's talk a bit about your life at the post office. What type of work did you do when you first got on with the post office?
After my probationary period, I chose to be a clerk. Okay. And I was a clerk, distribution clerk for a while. And then I got a job on the window, and at Parcel Post window. And then I became a window tech.
Well, was it common for a lot of blacks to be able to work on the windows at the post office? I heard that you might have been the first African-American to work the windows at the local post office.
That thing is drowning you out.
I said, I was told that you were the first African-American to work on the windows at...
No, I wasn't the first. Bill Jackson was the first.
Okay.
Actually, he wasn't the first. A guy named Clyde Ridgway came out of service and went, but he couldn't take it. In 2 months' time, he went back into service. A lot of people don't really never know that. But then Bill Jackson was hired as a carrier, and I was hired as a clerk. I was number 2.
So, did you have any problems with anybody while you were working there?
Yes. I had one guy, I'd been there about 2 months, and I bought a package of Fritos out of the machine. And he said, I was going to buy those. I said, so what? He said, well, you want them smarter, you fool around and get kicked, you know. I said, well, if you do, you'll make a track and a dot for the rest of your days.
So you worked at the post office how many years?
31 years.
31 years. It was a long time, long time. Let's kind of talk a little bit about life in the community. Tell us a little bit about your perception of Sharp End.
Well, Sharp End, and you move on the end there, a guy used to stand there on Friday and Saturday and Sunday nights and get call girls with guys that drive up. And on the corner was Alvin Coleman's liquor store and cab company. Then there was some steps going upstairs. Then there was the Green Tree Tavern, then Shug's Pub, Phillips Williams Barbershop, Merle Slater's Restaurant. And then it looks like it's all one building, but that last part is a separate building. Okay. And it had steps going upstairs to an apartment in a little alleyway.
Like this one here?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And it was Rat's Pool Hall for the longest. It ended up being Mick Brown's Beer Tavern. And the little restaurant there was Bob Harris's restaurant. And later on, Lawrence Lee had it. Then you branch down on Park Avenue. There was Alvin Coleman Junkyard,
Right.
and across the street was Cold Barbershop and laundry.
Cold water laundry.
But that laundry actually, in the beginning, belonged to Professor Coleman.
That's what they
He
said.
had a laundry there, and that was his office space that they was using.
That was in the area where the Head Start building is on Park Street. It was Alvin Coleman's cold water laundry. And he hired a lot of the ladies at the time because basically a lot of the men had gone to the Army. And the scrap yard, they used to say that the kids would climb over the fence, steal the ball bearings, and then come back around and resell them to them.
And down the street further was Noble's
Yes, Illinois.
Gold and Land Clearance.
Right. I think you can see that there were a lot more businesses in existence than what people thought. Sharpen was a major part, but there were businesses all spread out through the community that really made an impact on how the community grew. Who were some of the people that used to frequent that area? Was it just the black people or what?
Some people that did what?
It went to Sharp End. Who went to Sharp End?
Well, you might not believe it, but about 80% of the people didn't frequent Sharp End. There were just certain people that went up there. And, you know, people that wanted to go and have a drink or play shoot pool, something of that nature.
Okay, I'm going to ask you the hard question here. Everyone talks about Sharp End. What does Sharp End really mean?
Well, they used knives and razors. That's what it got its name from. When I was in the Army, you meet somebody from Ohio or somewhere, and they say, "Where are you from?" "Columbia, Missouri." "Oh my God, that's where you get your throat cut." First thing we say.
Well, that was a reputation you had to have, a reputation of being tough.
And see, one thing we haven't mentioned is Freeman Funeral Home was on the corner of 7th and Park Avenue. Shouldn't have been torn down. And then they had Stuart Parker Funeral Home where the Blind Boone Center is today.
Yeah.
The only thing left other was churches.
Well, and even some of the churches got moved because, like, I know Russell Chapel used to be down on Pendleton,
Right.
and Russell
It
Chapel
was
was
about the only church that had to be moved.
right, and they moved them over to 2nd Street, 2nd and Ash. You mentioned Mrs. Strawn, one of the teachers. Her house was part of the track also.
Big, beautiful home, set way back off Providence Road.
And, Annie Fisher's old house, that was all in the middle of that track too. So there was a lot of things that were taken, and then when you look at the footprint of public housing, they barely used 20% of the total area that was claimed, ironically.
Well, the land clearance had a plan, and everything within that plan had to go regardless. And that's what happened.
How do they pay these people for their houses? Do you know? How much do they pay them for their houses?
I only lived in 3 houses all my life.
Yeah. Because urban renewal came through and they offered people a certain amount of money, but it seems like a lot of people weren't able to build their houses after urban renewal came through. Did you know anything about that?
Well, they purchased a lot of people's houses, and it was my understanding that if they had to move into what they called it projects then, they had to spend that money before they could get the reduced price. Now, whether that was true or not, I don't know. That's what I was told. But it wasn't too many people wasn't but a few people who could go build a home after how they thought bought theirs. But they were too old.
One of the houses, one of the pieces of property I noticed was belonged to Mrs. Ruth Doby, who was really Mrs. Ruth Wiggins. They were able to purchase their property back. That's the office that's up on the hill at Ash
My
and
dad built 5 houses on Pendleton Street.
right. He had Adobe Flats and all that. A lot of things were taken out of the community that really broke the economy of the black community primarily, and made it difficult for blacks to really more or less gain their own economic stability, after that. We had people like Minor Ralph who had their own barbecue places and everything, like the gentleman that had the shoe shop. All these places were part of the community that, after urban renewal, lost their place. Nothing was there to replace it, and there was no way that many of the families could come up with enough money to start another business.
A lot of people didn't know it, but Pendleton Street didn't even go to Forest Garth Avenue until in the later years.
Right.
All that was Mr. Kirkland's garden. He had a beautiful level garden, and people would drive by just to look at the garden.
Yeah. Well, the University of Missouri Horticulture Department has dedicated one of the gardens, named the garden after Henry Kirkland because of his contributions. He was able to get a blue ribbon in 1904 World's Fair for his hotbed technique, and was known to be able to have plants and vegetables year-round. And he was doing advanced watering techniques and everything else. He worked as a janitor at the School of Horticulture. And since he was black, he couldn't go into the classrooms and teach. So for about 3 years, they would bring the students out on the steps of the horticulture building, and he would share his growth techniques. Yeah.
He had a cart with 1-horse cart, and he put his vegetables and things on there mornings and head for courthouse. And everything had to be put in a certain place at a certain time.
He was unique. He was a very unique individual. The story says he started his first business at the age of 14. At 14, his mother, Jane Kirkland, was a freed slave, and allegedly she went and bought him out of slavery. And if you look at a plat map, you'll see it. It says Kirkland Addition. And I think it's kind of ironic because Jane Kirkland might have been one of the first African-American females to buy a piece of property where it has her name on it. That Kirkland Addition is still in that area up around Switzerland.
The Kirkland home is still there on Swister Street, right there.
It is, yeah. That's going to be, they're going to be doing a marker there also as part of the historic African-American Trail. Well, tell me, what are your feelings about urban renewal and how it really affected the community? And then we'll open up for some questions.
Well, the community has grown. Land clearance and integration was all necessary, but it got rid of the camaraderie and the village-like atmosphere in the black community. But during those days, nobody even locked their doors. And everybody helped to raise the kids. If you were down the street throwing rocks, and they called your mother, you better not say you wasn't doing it, or you calling her a liar. You're going to get another whipping. That's the way it was.
I think there's a lot to be said about the way things were. It would be nice if we could reach back and take some of those good attributes and apply them today, because then we might not have a lot of things going on that are kind of repulsing people now. A lot of our violence and things like that are going on, where people are afraid to stand up and say anything to people when they see them doing something wrong. We might need to revisit some of these old values and try and see if we can revive them.
I want to thank everyone again for coming. There have been a lot of comments tonight about communication. This is not the end of the conversation. This is the beginning. The physical location of this building, if you think about it, with 2 front doors, is a connecting link between the University of Missouri and the city of Columbia. And that means the entire city of Columbia. I want the State Historical Society of Missouri and its Center for Missouri Studies to be a place where these kinds of conversations can take place, and where, as I said earlier, this can be a place where we begin to better understand, maybe understand for the first time, the complexity of this place we call Missouri and Columbia. I thank you for being here, and especially let's thank our guests one more time. Thank you.